All right, Chris, thank you so much. And you talk about that smoke. When I arrived in this area maybe a couple of minutes ago, there was a large black plume of smoke that popped up, and it was only up for a brief second. My assumption here is that firefighters are working to put out maybe some hot spots or some flare-ups. We are just a couple of miles down, really kind of a couple of minutes down from where that refinery fire happened. And if you go a little bit further down on the other side of this camera, it's a community, it's a neighborhood, and this is why they had to issue that precautionary mandatory evacuations. Now, earlier today, there was a press conference, and we had a lot of questions as to what started this fire. There was a mention of a leak at one of those containment facilities. They said that that leak is what started the fire, but what led up to the leak? Those are a lot of questions that weren't answered. Another question, of course, was air quality. Everyone was concerned as you have that smoke and that plume of smoke coming from a petrochemical facility. What could be in the air, and if the air is safe enough for us to be around or out here in this area? And to answer some of those questions, we have team coverage for you tonight. Whitney Miller, she's talking about the schools that had to evacuate as part of that mandatory evacuation order. And we have Alyssa Curtis, who spoke with some of the people who were the first to evacuate from this community. But we begin this evening with Paul Murphy giving us an update on where we stand right now. Paul.
Sharice, as you can see, that fire is pretty much out. Take a look as we zoom in earlier today. As you were saying, there was a huge plume of thick black smoke and flames shooting high into the sky, and it could be seen for miles away. But by mid-afternoon, firefighters finally got the blaze under control. Emergency responders spent the day battling a massive fire at the Marathon Petroleum plant in Garyville, about 40 miles upriver from New Orleans. It started shortly before 7 Friday morning near a pair of tanks that store naphtha, which is a component in the production of gasoline. Mike King lives about a block from the plant.
Walked out the front door, huge plume of smoke over Marathon, so I drove past it before they had the river road blocked to see the flames and whatnot. Went and warned some people on the other side, woke them up, told them the refinery was on fire.
Marathon spokesman Justin Lawrence said one of the storage tanks was leaking into a perimeter containment area and the chemical somehow ignited.
The tank didn't ignite. The product that is contained in our perimeter around the tank ignited, and that's where the fire is.
But from this aerial view, you can see flames leaping in the air high above 2 storage tanks. It's unclear whether the product inside also caught fire. 3 hours after the fire started, St. John Parish ordered a mandatory evacuation within a 2-mile radius of the plant.
It's really a precautionary measure. You know, there's a large smoke plume over the area, and so we just want to make sure that we're taking all steps that we can to ensure that our residents are safe.
St. John President Jacqueline Hotard lifted the order by mid-afternoon when firefighters got the blaze under control. She said there were no injuries at the plant and impacts from the fire were contained within the refinery's property.
It's alarming, you know, to see what's going on. So I understand the residents' concerns, especially for residents who have, you know, been here for a long time and seen, you know, different incidents that can happen. So it is a little scary.
State air quality teams have been monitoring neighborhoods surrounding the plant to make sure there were no toxic gas releases. About 50 firefighting personnel worked to put out the Marathon fire.
There is a large presence from the greater New Orleans region, sister refineries, as Marathon stated, as well as assistance from our adjacent parishes with their fire suppression services.
So again, we've been saying that over the last couple of hours, the Marathon fire has been flaring up again on and off for the last couple of hours. As you can see, it is not out just yet. We have firefighters on the scene putting out some hot spots, and we've been pretty much seeing this throughout the late afternoon, actually seeing some flamage there as well. But there are firefighters on the scene keeping an eye on what's happening out there. So again, we're watching the fire here at Marathon, and the neighbors who evacuated earlier today are returning home. And we now go to Alyssa Curtis, who's been speaking with some of the folks who evacuated earlier today. Alyssa.
Hey, Paul, yeah, as people were trying to abide by those orders, that evacuation order, the shelter-in-place order, a lot of schools were placed under a shelter-in-place or an evacuation order. The morning was just a bit hectic for residents here in St. John the Baptist Parish. Now, many say they were rushing to pick up their kids to abide by those orders, but the fire is now under control. But again, it did frighten some of these residents. A mandatory evacuation order enacted for those who live in a 2-mile radius of the Marathon refinery was lifted just before 2:30 p.m. But when the fire first started, many LaPlace residents saw the smoke and flames from their home.
Watching that cloud of smoke go up in the air is pretty devastating.
Arthur Chabot lives right across the street from the refinery. He says the way the smoke filled the sky, it looked like a volcano had exploded.
We had the sheriff's department coming around with the intercom saying everyone, needs to evacuate. It's mandatory.
Chabot helped his family get to East St. John Preparatory Academy to shelter. East St. John Prep only had a few cars parked outside.
Not as many people as I had hoped to see in there. I think a lot of people went to their family members and everything, but I think they're, handling everything pretty well up in there. I think they're bringing some food.
West St. John High was also open as a shelter. Before some residents took shelter, they picked up their kids from school. The parish evacuated some schools while others were under a shelter-in-place order.
Hectic, because from what I'm understanding, Riverside Academy has been evacuated here as well. So it's hectic. Everybody's waiting for their child. There's one administrator running from class to class to get each child, so I had to wait for about 30 minutes just to get him.
Once they got to their kids safely, parents were able to feel some relief, but were still worried.
Nobody don't get sick because it's pretty bad, and I hope it don't blow up.
Now, thankfully, that did not happen. As we learned, officials say that fire is now under control. The evacuation order has been lifted, and we just learned about 10 minutes ago that all roads are now open, so you are free to drive and get back to your home. Our Whitney Miller has been keeping up with schools and checking things out over there. Whitney, what's going on? What's the latest?
Oh, Lisa, thank you so much. Yeah, I'm here at East St. John Preparatory Academy, which you spoke about just a little bit ago. Things here are quiet now, and still now that the most dangerous part of the day is over. The school here was an evacuation shelter for some time, but I was able to speak with some parish officials who say things here, if you're concerned about extracurricular activities or events happening in the district today and tomorrow, things are back to their regularly scheduled programming. They say that if there are going to be any changes, you can follow their social media, and that's where they'll put some updates for you if there are any changes to be made to the calendar. When we got into town today, we went to Garyville, and we were able to speak to some of the residents there because they're in that 2-mile radius of the plant. I spoke with some residents who say they evacuated, and tonight at 10 you'll hear more from them on what they experienced and what they did to get their families to safety. For now, in East St. John the Baptist Parish, Whitney Miller, Eyewitness News. I'll send it back to you, Katie.
All right, Whitney, thank you so much. And we do have more coming up on the impacts of the fire. Up next, medical expert Dr. Corey Aber is joining us here in the studio to talk about the potential health effects of the chemicals that burned today. We have more ahead on the refinery fire in St. John Parish as our coverage continues. The fire at the Marathon refinery in Garyville led to an evacuation order, which has since been lifted. And coming up, again, we're bringing in our medical expert to talk about the possible health impacts.